The crisp, salty breeze of the Maine coast caressed my face as I stepped onto the beach, still half asleep. I had woken up to an empty bed, and Ethan was nowhere to be found in our cozy honeymoon suite. My heart pounded with a mixture of concern and annoyance. We were supposed to be enjoying our first few days as newlyweds, not playing hide-and-seek. As I trudged across the sand, I squinted into the darkness, straining to see any sign of my husband. That's when I spotted two figures in the distance, silhouetted against the moonlit waves. One was down on one knee, and the other... My breath caught in my throat as the awful realization hit me. "Ethan?" I called out, my voice trembling with disbelief. The kneeling figure froze, and the woman gasped, stumbling backwards. Ethan slowly rose to his feet, his expression a portrait of guilt and panic. "Marissa, I can explain," he stammered, but the words died on his lips as I approached them, fury rising like a tidal wave within me. "Explain what, exactly?" I spat, glaring at the strange woman standing beside him. "That you're proposing to another woman on our honeymoon?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The woman, however, found her voice. I had no idea he was married," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course you didn't, because he's a lying, cheating bastard." Turning on my heel, I stormed back towards the hotel, fighting back tears of rage and humiliation. I could hear Ethan's footsteps behind me, his pleas for me to stop and listen falling on deaf ears. Once inside our suite, I grabbed my suitcase and began stuffing my belongings into it with shaking hands. Ethan burst through the door, his expression a mask of desperation. "Marissa, please, just let me explain." I whirled around, my vision blurred by angry tears. "Explain what, Ethan? How you managed to make a complete mockery of our marriage before the ink was even dry on the certificate." "It's not what it looks like, I swear," he insisted, reaching out to grab my arm. I jerked away from his touch, my fury boiling over. "Don't you dare touch me," I hissed. "And don't insult my intelligence by lying to my face. I saw you proposing to that woman with my own eyes." Ethan's shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand over his face. I don't know what to say." "Then say nothing," I spat, zipping up my suitcase with a decisive yank. "Our marriage is over, Ethan, and trust me, you haven't seen the last of my wrath." With those parting words, I brushed past him and out of the suite, my heart shattered into a million pieces. But even through the pain and humiliation, a cold, steely resolve was taking root within me. Ethan had made the biggest mistake of his life, and I would make sure he paid dearly for it. The drive back to Boston passed in a blur of tears and seething rage. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, my mind was churning with 1,000 bitter thoughts and a single, crystalline determination. Ethan would pay for what he had done to me. I stormed into my apartment, slamming the door behind me with enough force to rattle the walls. Yanking open my laptop, I began meticulously documenting every shred of evidence I had against that lying bastard. The photos and videos I'd taken on the beach, the incriminating text messages, even receipts from our joint accounts that proved his financial deceptions. My hands shook with fury as I compiled the damning dossier, but a grim sense of purpose drove me onward. I was a lawyer, trained to fight and win cases. This time, the case was personal, and I would show no mercy. A knock at the door startled me from my vengeful reverie. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Marissa, please, we need to talk about this," he began, but I cut him off with a contemptuous laugh. "Talk? You want to talk after what you did? After making a complete mockery of our vows, our marriage?" Ethan flinched as if I'd struck him. "I know, and I'm sorry, but it's not as simple as it seems." "Save your pathetic excuses," I snarled, leveling an accusing finger at his chest. "I have all the evidence I need of your lies and betrayal, the pictures, the texts, the proof that you've been swindling me financially, too." His face drained of color. "How did you—" "I'm a lawyer, Ethan. Did you really think I wouldn't protect myself from a snake like you?" He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. "Get out of my sight before I do something we'll both regret. And don't even think about trying to wriggle your way out of this. I'm going to bury you so deep in legal hell you'll never see daylight again." For a moment, Ethan looked as though he might argue, but something in my expression must have warned him against it. He turned and trudged away, shoulders slumped in defeat. As soon as the door closed behind him, I let out a long, shuddering breath. My hands were still trembling, but it wasn't just from anger anymore. A cold, calculating resolve had taken root within me. I would make Ethan suffer as he had made me suffer. I would strip him of everything, his reputation, his finances, his freedom if necessary. No mercy, no quarter given. He had awakened a vengeful fury within me, and by God, he would reap the whirlwind. Turning back to my laptop, I began combing through the evidence with renewed focus, crafting my battle plan. The law was my weapon, and I would wield it with surgical precision. Ethan's world was about to come crashing down around him, and I would be the one holding the detonator. The next few days were a whirlwind of calculated retaliation. I pored over the fine print of our marriage prenup, consulting with lawyers to ensure I was on solid legal ground. Then I struck. First, I canceled every credit card and line of credit in Ethan's name. All accounts I had wisely kept separate control over. Next, I drained our joint savings, transferring the full amount to an account he couldn't access. He may have thought he could fleece me financially, but I was steps ahead of his deception. Finally, I paid a process server to hand-deliver the divorce papers to Ethan at his office. When he called me later that day, I could hear the panic in his voice. "Marissa, what the hell is this? You can't be serious." I smiled coldly at the tremor of fear in his tone. "Dead serious, Ethan. I want out of this sham of a marriage, and I'm taking what's rightfully mine in the process." "You can't just take all our money," he sputtered indignantly. "That's theft. It's my legal right after what you've done," I countered. "Or did you forget about those fake business investments you tricked me into? I have all the proof I need of your fraud." There was a long pause, and when Ethan spoke again, his voice was low and placating. "Marissa, listen. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but you have to understand." "I understand plenty," I cut him off. "I understand that you're a lying, cheating scumbag who never deserved me in the first place. This is the consequence of your actions, Ethan. Get used to it." "You're making a huge mistake," he growled, the phony contrition evaporating from his tone. "I'll fight you on this, and I'll win. You can't take everything from me." I laughed derisively. "I'm a skilled lawyer with an ironclad case, while you're a disgraced conman without a leg to stand on. Tell me, who do you think will win in court?" There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line, and I could picture the impotent rage twisting his features. "This isn't over, Marissa," he spat finally. "You're going to regret this." "I don't regret a thing," I replied coolly. "In fact, I'm just getting started." With that parting shot, I ended the call. Leaning back in my chair, I took a deep, cleansing breath. The initial storm of betrayal and pain had given way to an exhilarating sense of control. For the first time since that disastrous night on the beach, I felt empowered and in command of my life again. Ethan had made his bed, and now he would lie in it. A bed of his own making, filled with consequence and retribution. No more being the victim. From now on, I was the architect of his suffering. My fingers danced across the keyboard, compiling evidence and strategizing my next move. There was so much more I could do to destroy him. Professionally, financially, socially. And I intended to hit him from every angle until there was nothing left. A cruel smile tugged at my lips as I imagined the look on Ethan's face when he realized the full extent of the hell I would unleash upon him. He thought he could break my heart and emerge unscathed. He was about to learn just how mistaken he was. I would grind him into the dust, and when I was done, no one would ever dare cross me again. Ethan's downfall was inevitable now. He had awoken a force he could never hope to control, my thirst for revenge. With the financial rug pulled out from under him, Ethan was forced to face the harsh reality of his situation. But I wasn't done wielding my fury. Not by a long shot. It was time to deploy the next salvo in my campaign of revenge. I created a new social media account, one untraceable back to my real identity, and began systematically exposing Ethan's deceit to the world. First, I uploaded all the damning photos and videos from our ill-fated honeymoon, letting the incriminating evidence speak for itself. Then I detailed, in cold hard facts, how he had defrauded me financially through his phony business schemes. With each new post, I meticulously tagged Ethan's family members, his friends, his co-workers, leaving no corner of his life untouched by the humiliating revelations. I even tagged the woman he had been proposing to, ensuring she saw the full depth of his betrayal. The response was swift and brutal. Ethan's social circles essentially disowned him overnight as the truth came to light. Repulsed comments and messages flooded in, lambasting him as a liar and a cheater of the worst kind. His professional reputation lay in tatters thanks to my carefully constructed evisceration. When Ethan caught wind of what I'd done, he stormed over to my apartment in a blind rage, pounding on my door until I answered. "You vindictive bitch!" he snarled, his face blotchy with fury. "How could you do this to me?" I met his vitriol with an icy glare. "Easily. This is the price you pay for your betrayal, Ethan. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" "Airing out our private life for the whole world to see," he shouted, gesturing wildly at his phone. "Making me a pariah to everyone I know? That's going way too far." "Not far enough, if you ask me," I countered, unmoved. "You brought this on yourself with your lies and your fraud. I'm just serving you a long-overdue dish of public humiliation." Ethan's hands clenched into trembling fists at his sides, his eyes boring into me with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," he grated through gritted teeth. "Not by a long shot. You're going to pay for this, Marissa. I'll make sure of it." Empty threats from a disgraced con man? I couldn't help but laugh derisively. "I'm not impressed, Ethan. In fact, I'm just getting warmed up." With that parting shot, I slammed the door in his livid face, cutting off whatever retort he might have mustered. As I leaned back against the door, a satisfied smile crept across my lips. The once proud Ethan Sanders had been reduced to a raging, impotent wreck, all due to the devastating sword of truth I had unleashed upon him. His reputation was in ruins, his life in shambles, and I had only just begun to make him suffer. There would be no mercy, no halting the relentless onslaught I had set in motion. Not until Ethan was left a hollow, broken husk of a man would my thirst for vengeance be sated. Turning back to my laptop, I scanned the flood of new comments and messages, each one savoring the delicious vindication of seeing my tormentor so utterly debased. My fingers flew over the keys as I drafted my next salvo, something to twist the knife even deeper into his shattered ego. Ethan's anguished face swam in my mind's eye, stoking the banked fires of my fury into an inferno. He would know true suffering before this was over. The same torment he had inflicted upon me, multiplied 1,000-fold. This was far more than petty revenge. It was karma incarnate, and I was its unstoppable instrument of justice. With Ethan's life and reputation in ruins, I could have rested on my laurels, secure in the satisfaction of my revenge. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. There was one more devastating blow to deliver, one that would leave him destitute and disgraced beyond redemption. Poring over the evidence I had so carefully compiled, I drafted an ironclad civil lawsuit against Ethan, alleging fraud, emotional distress, and a laundry list of other offenses. I took particular care in documenting every last cent he had swindled from me under the guise of his phony business investments. When I had assembled an absolutely airtight case file, I hand-delivered the lawsuit myself, reveling in the look of abject horror on Ethan's face as he realized the extent of the legal hellstorm I was about to unleash. You can't be serious," he stammered, eyes wide as he flipped through the dossier of impeccably compiled evidence. "This is insane, Marissa." "Insane?" I echoed with a predatory smile. "No, this is justice. Long overdue justice for your duplicity and betrayal." Ethan shook his head vehemently. "It'll never hold up in court. You're delusional if you think a judge will buy into this ridiculous vendetta." "We'll see about that," I replied coolly. "I'm an exceptional lawyer, in case you've forgotten. With the overwhelming proof I have, winning this lawsuit will be child's play." Tossing the case file back at me, Ethan's expression contorted with impotent rage. "You're a vindictive, psychotic bitch. You'll never get away with this." I simply shrugged, unmoved by his juvenile tantrum. "I already have, Ethan. This is the reckoning you brought upon yourself through your lies and betrayal. Deal with it." Turning on my heel, I left him seething in silence, plotting my next steps. The court date was set, which gave me ample time to polish my stratagem perfection. In the weeks that followed, I pored over every shred of evidence, ensuring not a single detail was out of place. I anticipated every possible angle of Ethan's defense and prepared a bulletproof rebuttal. My case was obsessively, meticulously constructed, an impenetrable juggernaut of legal vengeance. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. I strode into the courthouse, my game face firmly affixed, and took my place across the aisle from Ethan and his admittedly skilled legal team. He met my gaze with a mixture of fear and defiant bravado, but I was unruffled. This would be a massacre. The proceedings commenced, and I dispassionately unleashed my case upon Ethan, undressing him with an implacable litany of facts, evidence, and masterful legal arguments. I could see the panic mounting behind his eyes as the scales tipped inexorably in my favor. His lawyers fought valiantly, but they were merely flailing against the riptide of my stratagem. I was an avenging force of nature, and there was no stopping my furious momentum. By the time I had concluded my ironclad case, even the judge looked faintly shell-shocked at the beatdown I had just delivered. As for Ethan, he stared at me with naked horror, realizing too late that he had poked the proverbial bear. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was the systematic destruction of his life and future. And I was the architect of his undoing, the unstoppable juggernaut crushing him underfoot. As we adjourned for the day, I couldn't resist leaning in close, fixing Ethan with a razor-edged smile. "Sleep well, dear husband," I purred with biting sarcasm, "because tomorrow I'm going to bury you." Ethan recoiled as if I had lashed him across the face. In that moment, I knew he finally understood the magnitude of the fury he had awoken within me. He had believed himself safe from any consequences after destroying my heart, but I was about to prove just how catastrophically mistaken he truly was. This was more than just revenge. It was divine retribution. And I was its merciless instrument. The courtroom was thick with tension as the judge took his seat, his expression inscrutable. Ethan sat rigidly beside his lawyers, shooting furtive glances my way, a mixture of defiance and trepidation flickering in his eyes. I returned his gaze with an icy stare, daring him to make eye contact. He quickly averted his eyes, and I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The smug bastard was finally starting to understand the gravity of his situation. "Court is now in session for the case of Clark versus Sanders," the judge's voice boomed out. "Mr. Sanders, how do you plead?" Ethan's lawyer rose smoothly to his feet. "Not guilty, Your Honor. My client vehemently denies all accusations of fraud and deceit." The bravado in his tone was undercut by the way his eyes nervously flicked towards me. Good, they knew the kill shot was coming. "Very well." The judge nodded. "Mrs. Clark, your opening statements?" Rising fluidly, I fixed Ethan with a glare that could cut glass. "Thank you, Your Honor. What we have here is an open and shut case of deliberate betrayal, emotional abuse, and multi-layered fraud perpetrated by Mr. Sanders against his own wife." I paused, letting the weight of the accusation hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The evidence I will present details not just his reprehensible infidelity and cruelty." My eyes bored into him, burning with righteous fury, but his criminal deception in defrauding me of hundreds of thousands of dollars through phony business investments and blatant financial subterfuge. Ethan's lawyer rose in protest. "Objection, Your Honor. These are unsubstantiated allegations being treated as fact." But the judge waved him off. "I'll hear Mrs. Clark's evidence first before ruling. Please continue." Nodding, I turned and activated the courtroom monitors, displaying the first damning image, Ethan down on one knee before another woman on our honeymoon beach. As you can clearly see, my voice dripped with icy disdain. This piece of evidence, corroborated by video, timestamps, and geographical data, proves beyond any doubt that Mr. Sanders flagrantly violated his marriage vows within days of our wedding. The hushed gasps and murmurs from the gallery were music to my ears. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan's pallor drain to an ashen hue. He was already unraveling, and I had barely begun. For the next 2 hours, I methodically flayed Ethan's defenses to ribbons. Financial records, phone logs, third-party testimonies, I unleashed an unrelenting barrage of proof, dismantling his team's denials and objections with surgical precision. Finally, I turned to the thorny matter of his fraudulent investments. As you can see from these bank statements, Mr. Sanders misappropriated funds totaling nearly $500,000 into non-existent business ventures. I let the words hang in the air like a noose tightening around Ethan's neck, all sanctioned under falsehoods and forged documentation. Ethan's lawyer shot to his feet in a futile effort to regain control. Objection! These findings are circumstantial at best, but the judge silenced him with a stern look. After the overwhelming evidence presented, I'm disinclined to agree, Counselor. Please continue, Mrs. Clark. By now, Ethan was ghostly pale, beads of sweat glistening on his brow. His eyes were wild, desperate, a hunted animal realizing it had been run to ground with nowhere left to flee. I let the deadly silence linger for a few agonizing moments before delivering the coup de grace. In summation, Your Honor. I paced slowly before the bench, arms folded coolly behind my back. Mr. Sanders has proven himself a duplicitous, fraudulent criminal who defrauded and emotionally abused his own wife for personal gain. My footsteps echoed in the tomb-like stillness as I turned to face the judge. He has displayed a complete lack of contrition, empathy, or integrity, and must be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Then I wheeled on Ethan, my eyes boring into him like branding irons. No mercy, I said, loud enough for all to hear, not after what you've done. Ethan recoiled as if struck, the words searing his flesh like acid. And in that moment he saw the truth laid bare. He had tragically underestimated the fury he had awoken within me. As I returned to my seat, I allowed myself the briefest flicker of a smile. The boot was well and truly on the other foot now. Ethan had made the disastrous mistake of believing he could hurt me with impunity. But I would make sure he paid for that arrogance 1,000 times over. His reputation, his finances, his freedom, all of it would be sacrificed on the pyre of his misdeeds. There would be no mercy this day. He had sealed his fate the moment he decided to betray me. This was justice, long overdue and utterly merciless, and I was its architect. The courtroom was utterly silent as the judge cleared his throat, his face an inscrutable mask. I could almost taste the thick tension hanging in the air as Ethan and his lawyers sat frozen, their confident veneer having crumbled to dust. After carefully reviewing the overwhelming evidence presented by Mrs. Clark, the judge's voice seemed to reverberate in the stillness. I find the defendant, Mr. Ethan Sanders, guilty on all counts of fraud, emotional distress, and willful deceit. A shocked murmur rippled through the gallery as Ethan slumped back in his chair, a broken man. His lawyer sputtered a few feeble objections that fell on deaf ears. Furthermore, the judge's steely gaze bored into Ethan. Mr. Sanders is hereby ordered to pay compensatory damages to the plaintiff, totaling $2.3 million, in addition to punitive penalties to be determined at a later date. My heart surged with vindication, and it took every ounce of self-control not to openly smirk. Ethan simply stared ahead, slack-jawed and hollow-eyed, unable to process the devastating blow I had dealt him. As the courtroom emptied, I couldn't resist one final shot across his bow. Leaning in close as he was being led away, I murmured with searing sarcasm, "Congratulations, dear husband. You've officially lost everything." Ethan flinched as if slapped, the implication finally sinking in. Thanks to my legal evisceration, he was utterly destitute, disgraced beyond repair, and staring down the barrel of potential jail time. My vengeance was complete, yet as I watched his crumpled form being hauled away in disgrace, I felt a profound hollowness settle in the pit of my stomach. This should have been the ultimate catharsis, a balm for the anguish he had inflicted upon me. And yet, the drive back to my apartment passed in silence, my knuckles aching from how tightly I gripped the steering wheel. My head was a roiling vortex of conflicting emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also guilt, emptiness, despair. Had my quest for vengeance truly brought any solace, any sense of closure? Or had I simply opened up fresh wounds, bloodying my own soul in the process? Mechanically, I let myself into my apartment and tossed my briefcase aside. My gaze fell upon the framed photos on my wall, snapshots of happier times, when Ethan and I were deliriously in love, full of hopes and dreams. With a choked sob, I seized one of the frames and flung it across the room, shattering it against the far wall. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks as the dam finally burst, rage and sorrow pouring out in racking waves. I sank to my knees amidst the shards of broken glass, keening like a wounded animal. All the trauma, the fury, the emptiness inside me erupting in a violent purge of emotion. What had any of this truly accomplished? Hurting Ethan as he had hurt me had seemed so righteous in concept, but now I was left feeling like the husk of the joyful, loving woman I had once been. Hours slipped by in that haze of grief before the tears finally subsided, leaving me hollow and numb. Eventually, I rose on shaky legs and made my way to the bathroom, stripping off my ruined suit and letting the scalding water wash away the sorrows of the day. As I stood there beneath the punishing spray, shuddering with exhaustion, a sudden realization crystallized. My vengeance had accomplished nothing. Yes, I had utterly destroyed Ethan in every sense of the word, but where had that left me? Drained, deadened, and utterly alone. In that moment, I desperately longed for a chance to hit the reset button, to go back and handle the pain of betrayal in a healthier way. But it was far too late for that now. I had sacrificed my soul on the altar of revenge, and there was no going back. The days and weeks after my courtroom victory over Ethan blurred together in a fog of emptiness and self-loathing. I had achieved everything I'd set out to do. The lying bastard was now destitute, disgraced, and potentially facing jail time for his crimes. Yet instead of the catharsis I had envisioned, I felt utterly hollow inside. Like an edifice stripped bare, leaving only dead foundations where my soul had once thrived. I tried to lose myself in work, burying my emotions under an avalanche of cases and client meetings, but no matter how many hours I spent at the office, the gnawing emptiness trailed me like a specter, haunting my every waking moment. "Mrs. Clark?" My assistant's voice crackled over the intercom, snapping me out of yet another brooding trance. "Your 2 o'clock appointment is here." "Send them in," I sighed, marshalling what little energy I could muster. The door opened, revealing a young couple who looked equally worried and determined. As they settled into the plush chairs across from me, I noted the way the woman's hand instinctively covered her stomach, rounded with the unmistakable swell of pregnancy. "Miss Ramirez, Mr. Diaz," I nodded, putting on my best professional demeanor. "How can I assist you both today?" The woman, Ramirez, I presumed, spoke up, her voice trembling with barely contained anguish. "It's my husband, Mrs. Clark. He lost his job 4 months ago after his employer discovered he had been stealing funds to fuel a gambling addiction." She swallowed hard, seemingly fighting back tears. "We're already drowning in debt, and now he's telling me the money he stole was meant for our baby's college fund that his parents set up for us." The man, Diaz, hung his head in obvious shame, but didn't deny the allegations. I felt a pang of pity for the poor woman, but also a stirring of anger at the deception her husband had perpetrated. Taking a breath, I laced my fingers together atop my desk. "I understand this is an incredibly difficult situation, Ms. Ramirez, but I need to know. Are you seeking to take legal action against your husband, or are you hoping to find a way to make amends and move forward?" The woman's anguished eyes searched mine imploringly. "I love my husband more than anything, Mrs. Clark, but what he did, it was such a profound betrayal of my trust, of our future family." Her hands unconsciously cradled her swollen belly. "I just don't know if I can ever trust him again after this. How can I build a life with someone capable of that level of deceit?" The words struck me like a physical blow, the pain and confusion in her voice reverberating through the hollowness within me. Suddenly, unbidden, I was transported back to that fateful night on the beach. The rage, the betrayal, the utter devastation as my own life came crashing down around me. In that moment, I saw my own torment reflected in Miss Ramirez's eyes, and I was awash in shame. By pursuing my single-minded quest for vengeance, had I become as toxic and destructive as the man who had wronged me? A new sense of determination began to kindle within me then, a drive to ensure that no one else would have to endure the anguish I had subjected myself to. There had to be a better way forward, one that didn't reduce us to hollowed-out husks devoid of empathy and hope. "Miss Ramirez," I said more gently than I had spoken in months, "what your husband did was unquestionably a grievous violation of your trust, a betrayal that understandably has you questioning everything." I paused, carefully weighing my next words. "But ask yourself this. Do you want to resolve this through more pain and destruction? Or is there a part of you that still wants to find a way to heal, to rebuild what has been broken?" The woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her internal struggle writ large on her features. Finally, after a long silence, she spoke in a small voice. "I want to find a way to heal," she whispered, "for the sake of my child." our family. Nodding, I felt the stirrings of purpose rekindle within me, a sense that I could use my own anguished experience to prevent others from marching down that same misguided path. "Then, that's where we'll start," I said with the first genuine smile I'd managed in far too long. "It won't be easy, but I believe we can find a way to make things whole again, without tearing each other apart in the process." As I began mapping out a mediation approach, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I had stumbled onto my true calling at long last. My own road to healing had been brutal and destructive, leaving me shattered in its wake. But perhaps I could use those harsh lessons to light the way for others, preventing them from succumbing to the soul-devouring cancer of bitterness and rage. It was a new beginning, an opportunity for redemption. And this time I vowed to walk the path of reconciliation and renewal, no matter how arduous. For far too long I had been consumed by the fires of vengeance. But now, at long last, I could begin to douse those flames and rise anew from the ashes.